Hello and welcome to another episode of Sustainability Asia, our video series where we talk to colleagues and clients about sustainability and its impact on businesses in Asia. My name is David Milligan. I'm a banking partner in Norton Rose Fulbright's Hong Kong office. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Ben Smith, who's an energy partner in our Singapore office. Ben, welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, David.
What I'd like to talk to you about today, Ben, is a topic close to your heart, LNG. And specifically, we've spoken to other guests in the series about tracking emissions in a whole value chain. That obviously would include the shipping elements. I understand you've been involved in an interesting transaction recently involving tracking of LNG emissions. Can you talk a bit about it, please?
Yeah, sure. It's an interesting area, really, that we've seen, consumer products and so on seeking to track the emissions associated with every step of their production line, and then try to offset those carbon emissions. But ultimately, one of the largest sources of emissions is obviously the energy that these projects consume. And so that methodology of track emissions has now reached the oil and gas sector. And I've been working with Pavilion Energy, which is a gas trader based here in Singapore, who has been entering into a number of contracts over the last few months, which have been the first long-term LNG supply contracts that have asked their suppliers to track the emissions associated with delivering cargoes of LNG to Pavilion. This has turned out to be a lot more of a complicated topic than I had expected, perhaps. And it's been very interesting to me for a number of different reasons. At the moment, ultimately, the only consequence of this tracking effort is with you and I as consumers of goods and energy. There are no global standards yet associated with how you can track carbon emissions and indeed how you offset them. There are a number of different voluntary standards and so on. And so, we've spent quite a bit of time with the client discussing exactly how they ought to try to track these emissions so that they can come up with a comprehensive methodology. And Pavilion's hope is that their methodology will now be adopted by the industry, which will enable these tracked cargoes of LNG to be offset and also to be traded.
And so does this mean then that consumers down the line may be able to choose between products and see maybe on the packaging, the amount of emissions through the whole value chain, and decide that I want product A and not product B because the emissions would be greater?
Yeah, I guess so. Although, whether you're going to choose a packet of whatever based on its the carbon impact of its energy, I'm not quite sure. Certainly where it will really bite in a energy trading context is that, if you have a trader like Pavilion, for example, which is looking to source gas in a emissions efficient way for customers in Singapore or any of these other Southeast Asian countries, which are still ultimately dependent on fossil fuels because of the limited scope for renewables projects. If they have a choice between a source of LNG which is very emissions intensive, either because of the way that the gas has been produced, or perhaps it's been shipped by on a particularly long route with a very inefficient vessel, or maybe it's just using older technology, compared with another source, which I don't know, maybe it's got a carbon capture and sequestration project associated with it, which is capturing all the emissions associated with liquefying the LNG in the first place. Then they can make a much more informed decision on which project to choose, and maybe the cleaner project can charge a premium on its energy or its LNG prices going forward to reflect that greater investment in clean technology.
Great. Well, thanks very much for that, Ben. We look forward to seeing how things develop. That's all we have time for this week. We're back next week with another video.